Welcome to Sagas, a channel where we science the shit out of your favorite anime, games, and all sorts of other stuff. I'm your host Iker, and today we're proud to be bringing you another Dragon Ball Legends video. In today's video, we're going to be discussing two of the new units in the game, Goten and Trunks. Then we're going to be concluding our analysis with a recommendation on whether you should spend big, bargain hunt, or save. When it comes to fashion balls, we give Goten a 4 out of 7. He's a fairly generic card, doesn't have a special looking green, and the Kamehameha is what it is. I did enjoy the headbutt at the end of his strike combo, and his card art is nice. It was a touching picture of Goku and Goten sharing a father-son moment in the background, but otherwise just unimpressive. You know what is impressive? The base stats that you see on your screen now. We compared him to Super Saiyan 2 Gohan and were pleasantly surprised. He is a better base damage dealer, and he might even be better overall, but more on that after this. He is considerably less tanky than Gohan, who boasts more HP and overall defense, and Goten's unbuffed ki is only slightly better, but overall we're going to say this sibling rivalry is a tie, for now. Where things get really interesting are when we start looking at their all damage buffs, since this extremely important consideration is where Goten's biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses lie. As far as potential damage goes, he's the absolute best in the game currently, coming in at a whopping 295% buff to strike. If you could pull this off and hit Sparking Bardock, type neutral foe mind you, you would hit him for 298,000 in one strike. For perspective, Gohan is hitting people with a total strike buff ranging between 135 to 155%. And against the same Bardock, who he now has type advantage on, he's going to be hitting Bardock for 280,000 in a single strike, with type advantage. Goten's burst potential is literally second to none. However, and if you're a butt guy or gal, here comes the but, let's talk about each of those buffs, how much they contribute to the total amount, and more importantly, how exactly they're applied, and for how long does this buff actually stay. Starting with his largest contributor to overall damage, his main ability, which allows you to destroy between 1 to 4 blast cards for a buff ranging between 50 to 200%, you instantly then draw a card, and that buff on damage will apply only to the next card you used. Blast, strike, or even blue, whether it lands or not. If you miss or the enemy counters, then you've lost a handful of cards and the buff. He is a high risk, high reward version of Gohan who is much more consistent method for increasing damage. Next, we have his unique abilities, starting with a buff from Trunks. This shouldn't be hard to do. Bringing Kid Trunks is pretty easy since he's individually a powerful unit that is even better when paired with Goten. That's a pretty solid 40% buff that is up the entire fight. So is that the exception or the rule? Next up, we've got his opener buff. It's got a pretty solid timer count of 30 and gives you an additional 20% strike damage. However, even with that generous timer count, there's a 15 count window where you would need to have collected 4 blast cards so that you can stack with the main ability, all while dealing as much damage with the strikes that you're cycling through during the opener buff. It's not impossible to do, but it's also not reliable or easy. That's a tight window to try to get everything done in, and requires a balanced art card mix or close to it. Luckily, Kid Trunks and Kid Goten together bring a balanced deck. It's important to note that if you do go down this path, you're also forsaking the Trunks opener buff, because he gets a buff to blast just like Goten does. So we're not sure from a team perspective how great this is, since you're literally saving up all your blast cards and not using them just to get the main ability to pop off as soon as possible. It may actually make sense not to try to stack this, but rather to wait till the opening buffs are over with. Goten's blue and green cards are actually quite nice. Both of them are providing buffs to the strike that we added into our original scenario. They last for 15 and 20 timer counts respectively, which means they take an already tight window and make it near impossible. His green is absolutely amazing though, as it scales with each hybrid Saiyan he goes into battle with. So while in a perfect case, Goten could be an absolute game changer, we think with all things considered, the best you can hope for is a 2 to 3 blast card main with a green card, the opening buff, and the Trunks buff. This would give him a more realistic 160% buff to his strike, which is slightly larger than Gohan's, but much less reliable overall. Now, what team should we put Goten on then? Hybrid Saiyans, of course. Kid Goten and Kid Trunks are a near perfect pairing who can easily cover the spectrum of damage from Blast to Strike. Their third starter is a bit trickier, but it does seem like Super Saiyan 2 Gohan is the way to go. Cycling between both Trunks and Goten during your opener means that you always have a powerful buff attached to any of the cards that you draw, Blast or Strike. Then you swap into Gohan and use him like everybody else is using him, just let him do some damage because that's what he does best. But as you're doing this, make sure that you're setting up Goten's main and collecting those Blast cards. Once you have set up Goten's main, you swap off of him. His buff does stay after being swapped back in, so we're going to treat this like a well-timed Rising Rush and use the buff only once we've started a combo with another character. Note, you are not limited to using this on Strike, but it is Goten's most powerful stat. As for his Z ability, he buffs Hybrid Saiyan's base strike attack for a decent amount. So what's the conclusion on Goten? Goten is a flashy character. When you see the incredible numbers, your initial instinct is, wow, this guy is a god. And if you can really control the flow of combat, well, then he is the best damage dealer in the game. However, the skill cap is high, and it's not going to be easy to execute his abilities at their maximum potential because of how many moving parts there are. And even if you are perfect, what if you don't draw the green card or enough blasts? What if you're forced into a swap before you can execute this? He brings an ideal art card mix though, and that's important to consider as well, for both himself and Gohan, who is a very likely ally. So should you spend big, bargain hunt, or save? I'd say spend big. Even if we only count half of his damage buffs at any given time, he's still one of the best strike characters in the game. But onto Trunks. The look on Vegeta's face when Kid Trunks goes Super Saiyan in the gravity chamber for the first time, it was priceless. But what followed was just as interesting a moment where father and son trained together to see if Trunks could win an hour at the park with his old man. This is the scene we get in the card art and we like it, but apart from that, Trunks is generic. That gives him a Fashion Balls rating of 3 out of 7. His base stats though, they are solid all around. His defensive stats aren't that great, but they're definitely good enough. His key restore isn't bad either. However, where he truly shines is in his blast attack, where he is the highest base blast attack in the game. But if this isn't your first rodeo here at Sagas, then you know what I'm about to get to. Yup, that's exactly what I was going to say. I love how we're on the same wavelength. But for those of you who don't have that psychic connection with me just yet, know that we here at Sagas take understanding game mechanics to the next level, and while base stats are an important aspect of damage output, they're one of the least efficient ways to boost damage. The most efficient is up next. What do his all damage buffs look like? Starting with his main ability, it inflicts a debuff on an opponent which reduces their ki regen by 100% for 10 timer counts. You can use this to really limit your opponent's combo potential, and this alone is a powerful ability, but on top of that, Trunks has a win more mechanic that drastically reduces his Vanishing Gauge cooldown if he's got a higher health than the person in front of him. These abilities don't boost his damage, but they certainly add value to Trunks' toolkit overall. Similar to Goten, Trunks receives a power boost for being teamed up with his bestest buddy. So when Trunks and Goten team up, Trunks receives a 40% all damage boost to his blast stats when coupled with his unique ability makes him a powerful ranged fighter. Again, similar to Goten, Trunks does the most damage when he's starting the fight, and in this window of 30 counts, he receives an additional 20% all damage buff to his blast. This is a solid percent, but when compared to his yellow type father, Super Vegeta, we see that in terms of numbers, he's much further below his father's potential damage output. Despite being ahead of him in base stats, of course, this again is because of how damage is calculated. Please check out our videos explaining how damage works in this game if you're not understanding why this is the case, but we'll also touch on this a little bit more later. Vegeta and Trunks both have reliable ways to buff their stats, but those buffs need to have their limitations considered. If we were to give somebody the edge though, it would have to be Trunks, simply because the majority of his buffs come from being paired with Goten, which, yeah, that's really not hard to do. Now, Trunks' blue card, Double Buster, adds an additional 15% damage inflicted for 15 timer counts to go with his 60% above. When this lands, it has the added effect of reducing enemy ki recovery by 30%. His green card increases blast by another 10% for each Hybrid Saiyan in battle and reduces cost by 1. This effect makes his green card one of the absolute best in the game when he's on a hybrid team. If all things are going his way, he would have an all damage bonus of 105%, which is just 10% behind dear old dad. So Vegeta against Bardock would hit for 98,000 per yellow card, if all of his buffs were up of course, while Trunks against the same target would only be hitting for 83,000. That's despite Trunks having a better base blast. Just another example of why all damage bonuses are the absolute best in the game. However, Just like with Goten, when trying to draw comparisons, we need to consider uptime and ease of use. Vegeta's uptime on his buffs varies a tiny bit as it escalates to max value. Also, Vegeta plays as a debuff when he comes on the field, but if the opponent switches out, this debuff leaves with him and the new character is unaffected. We say all this because Trunks' buffs are really reliable. Even his opener buff lasts about 30 counts. That's definitely enough time to get some really solid use out of it. And his green, well, that lasts for 20 timer counts. Trunks is close enough in terms of absolute damage, and he's also a lot more consistent. I'd say overall advantage, Trunks. Like Goten, Trunks belongs on a hybrid team because of his Z ability green card and unique abilities, which all scale in effectiveness the more hybrid Saiyans he has on his team. As we said earlier, you can run both Goten and Trunks with the Super Saiyan 2 Gohan, as well as putting Super Saiyan Trunks, Pan, and Super Trunks on the bench just to complete the rainbow. In conclusion, Trunks is a reliable and powerful range attacker whose synergy with Goten makes them as a pair really powerful. So should you spend big, bargain hunt, or save? You can't have one without the other, so this is another case of spending big again. Well, that's going to do it for us today, folks. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Buy, Bargain Hunt, or Save, where we showcase the new units and tell you how deep you should go to add them to your collection. If you did enjoy this content and want more like it, make sure you give the video a colossal thumbs up and don't forget to Delaware smash that subscribe button. Until next time.